share a lot of information with you about pruning deciduous fruit trees. And then while he's talking, I'll sort of disappear into the chat, and you can ask questions in the chat. And if it's a clarifying question, I'll interrupt him, and we'll get that sorted out. But if it's not, I'll just capture the questions, and we'll start with them at the Q&A session, at the portion at the end of today's session. So I believe that's all the information you need to know, except you need to know about Orin. Orin has spent 43 years teaching at CASFIS. Over 1,600 apprentices have learned from his hands-on instruction, and he possesses and demonstrates an encyclopedic knowledge of fruit trees and many other gardening topics. And yeah, that's another one of those links you could click on when we send you the slides later. So without any other introduction, I'll throw it over to Orin.
Great, Claire. First, yeah, it takes a village to put on an event like this, and I appreciate everybody's help, and Claire's especially, because I get the pleasure of working with her daily, and I couldn't think of a better partner in grime. Okay, this event is brought to you by the UCSC, the Friends of the UCSC Farm and Garden. They are our affiliates support group. And indeed they are. They support us in oh so many ways. One being putting on, every year putting on a series of workshops, much like this, only for real and in person, and often charging a nominal fee for them. And at the present, we are appropriately restricted by COVID to doing things both remotely, and we're doing it for free. And hey, free stuff is good. But they support us in a number of ways, and I would like to encourage you to become a member of the Friends of the Farm and Garden. And there are perks. You see some on the screen here, 10% off at local nurseries on bare root trees, early entry to our annual plant sale, which we're hoping to have again this May, and a quarterly newsletter that Aaron edits that's really chock full of information. But the main perk you get from joining the Friends of the Farm and Garden is the satisfaction in knowing that you're supporting our work as we train the next generation of organic farmers and gardeners. And we teach them the rudiments, the practical skills therein, but we're also endeavoring more and more to weave in threads of social justice and inclusion. So I'm sure you'd want to support that, so why don't you join? Okay. Today's agenda, as stated, but before we get in, see if we can throw a little light, as it were, on pruning and do the impossible to teach fruit tree pruning remotely. I often start these things out with a quote or a poem or something to that effect, and indeed I have one here. This is an excerpt from a poem entitled "Throw Yourself Like a Seed" by Miguel de Unamuno, a Spanish philosopher, essayist, playwright, political activist, and philosopher, lived mid-1800s to 1930s. And a portion of it goes like this. Let me add that he lived during very politically tumultuous times in Spain. So, shake off this sadness and recover your spirit. Sluggish, you will never see the wheel of fate that brushes your heel as it turns going by. The person who wants to live is the person in whom life is abundant. So perhaps this speaks to resilience, yes, but also to discipline and focus. And I offer it in the hope that you, and me too, can find fertile ground. So let's tend soil, cast seed, prune trees, and make the world a better place. All right, I'm gonna start with a little overarching statement regarding pruning. These are not my words, would that they were. It's from a fellow named Jim Ryder, recently retired, preeminent apple grower in the Pajaro Valley south of here. Grew 80 acres of apples, was out ahead of the curve, and was figured out how to grow apples organically in the late 70s, early 80s, when the conventional wisdom is, nah, you can't do that. And he did it in part in cooperation with researchers from Cassis for the Farm and Garden, particularly Sean Swayze. One time we invited him up to speak to the apprentices about pruning, and indeed he came. Jim is quite a guy, a bit of a laconic wit, and he has a way of kind of ambling up to the topic. So he started off his session with this quote here. Pruning is a useful skill, much like driving, another useful skill. But if you don't know where you're going and how to get there, it doesn't do you much good now, does it? So I'm going to build on that a little bit. So where are we going and how will we get there? Let's answer the second question first. The way that we're going to get there, the way that you get there with fruit trees is via pruning and training. And where is it that we're headed? We're headed towards a tree that is size manageable. 8 to 10 feet, maybe 12 to 15 feet max. Now, tree size is a function of a number of things. You can both create size and limit size with pruning. We'll get after it a little bit down the road here. But tree size is also very much a function of two key choices you need to make: rootstock and variety. There are all different size controlling rootstocks, from truly mini dwarf, the 4 to 6 foot apple, to the full size, marvelous 30-foot apple, peach, pear, whatever you like. So that'll have the rootstock you grow your trees on will have a principal determinant in terms of how tall the tree gets. And the variety is also a factor in how vigorous or tall trees get. Some varieties are more vigorous than others. But my experience has been, I am trustful that you too can keep your trees at a reasonable height, 8, 10, 12 feet, let's say. So that's what we want to do. And you want to create a tree that has a permanent branch structure. And these branches need to be stout, strong, and self-supporting, so that they can hold the weight of the wood, of course, but also the weight of the fruit. One of the dividends of pruning, and pruning with what are called heading cuts, that is where you cut a branch back a portion of its growth, is that it thickens and strengthens branches and it makes them self-supporting. Now I know so you want these stout, strong branches. I know it's lousy English, but you don't want no serious saggers. I'll give you a serious sagger here. If you don't prune, what will happen is you'll produce fruit out towards the end of the branch, and as that fruit enlarges over the course of the year, you got yourself a serious sagger, folks, and it'll probably break. When a branch goes below horizontal, it loses vigor, and so it's a slippery slope. So you want to create. You go down in Owassaville again, you see those big old trees, they have to prop up the branches. You want to create a tree that has self-supporting branches. You can do this with heading cuts, that is the cutting back of branches. So you've got this permanent branch structure with thick, strong branches, and you want to fill the space allotted. You might have 8 feet between trees, 10 feet, 12 feet. There's some variability there, but whatever the space you have to fill, you want to fill it, and you want to fill it quickly, but you don't want to overfill it. So we'll get to defining the cuts and their responses in terms of pruning in a few minutes here. But basically, when a tree is young, you want to stimulate it with what is called a lot of heading cuts. A heading cut is simply cutting back a branch, a portion of its growth. And it's so counterintuitive, but essentially, the more you cut it back, the longer and stronger its growth will be in the next season. So when a tree is young, you want to fill that space, so you prune it hard. As a tree ages, you back off, you do less heading cuts, and there'll come a point in the tree's life where you don't want to stimulate it anymore, and you'll stop making these heading cuts, the cutting back of a branch, a portion of its length. And then you'll use thinning cuts and another type of cut that I'll demonstrate, shortening cuts. But you want to fill space, fill the allotted space, and you want to do it quickly. And your tool for invigorating a tree is winter pruning. It stimulates. You need a tree that strikes a balance between having enough tree, wood structure, and having enough fruit. And your bias is a little more towards fruit. When you look at a tree, the big wood is structural. The little wood or the flat wood, the flat branches are your fruit-bearing units. So primary branches grow up and out and into the light. They're strong, self-supporting. And off of those primary branches, you have a series of weaker, flatter laterals. It is on the laterals that the fruit is born. Almost all species of fruit bear almost all their fruit on laterals. The joke being, hey folks, laterals are your friends. So you're looking at an idealized tree, and you grow, as the screen says here, trees are grown to articulated geometric forms. There are many of them. I know 25 or 30, I probably employed 8, 9, or 10. The two represented here are the two basic tree forms I'm going to talk about, but the video and my emphasis will be a little more on the open center, also called the vase, and the modified central leader. I might note, as a side note, here are a couple of tree training forms. The UFO form, yeah, really. Upright fruiting offshoot. It's a way to train cherries to be short. And the KGB form, it's Kim, which is an Australian station. Anyhow, this two oddly named tree forms, I won't go into tonight, KGB and UFO. Open center, and let's go back to open center, and modified central leader. So there are two primary things you're trying to do with shaping your trees. You want branches, again, to grow up and out and into the light. You need good horizontal and vertical spacing between your branches. So you want a tree that is enough tree, it grows up and out into the light, and it intercepts an optimum amount of sunlight. Sunlight fuels photosynthesis. Photosynthesis grows the tree. So interception is the #1 goal of tree form and tree extent. But there's a second aspect of that, and that would be infiltration. You need branch arrangements, spatial arrangements, again, vertical and horizontal spacing of your tree branches in such a manner that it creates these alleys or shafts of light into the core of the tree. The top of the tree, the outer periphery, the shell of the tree has got plenty of sunlight. And you usually look on big old trees and they have plenty of well-colored, good taste and juicy fruit up there. As you move into the interior of the tree, the fruit gets smaller, scarce, poorly colored, and not so nutritional and tasty. Here's the deal with sunlight. Unaided, without pruning and training properly, sunlight doesn't move more than 3 or 4 feet into a tree canopy. You need a minimum of 50 to 80% of the 100% of the sunlight that falls from the sky to strike a branch and manufacture and maintain quality fruit bud. Again, that old pseudo haiku, grower pseudo haiku, the more sunlight you intercept, the more fruit you will get. But if you don't got light, you don't got fruit. So the periphery is covered. The interior needs to be accounted for by how you shape branches. If you look at big old trees, often you'll see not only not much fruit in the center of the tree, the bottom portions of the tree, but there's not even enough sunlight to grow leaves. It's bare wood. Later in the show, we have a slide of a big old tree, and you'll see that evident. So sunlight doesn't move more than 3 to 4 feet into a canopy unaided. So you aid it with your training and your shaping and your pruning. But hey, let's pause. Let's sing praises to dwarf rootstocks. What if you were using dwarf rootstocks and you grew trees that were, I don't know, 6 to 8 feet tall and 6 to 8 feet wide? Sunlight only penetrates 3 to 4 feet into a canopy. Hey, a 6x6 or a 6x8 or an 8x8 tree, wouldn't you just about have 100% saturation of light into the core of the tree, no matter what you did? Yeah, it really speaks to dwarf trees. Sunlight infiltration. Dwarf trees are also more productive if you analyze the pounds of fruit per volume of the canopy than bigger trees, and you can get more of them in a given space. So the dwarf tree will outproduce the big tree per area, and the quality of the fruit will be probably higher. Light interception, light infiltration. Let's talk a little bit about pruning and training goals. First of all, I like to use the terms pruning and training in tandem, hand in glove as it were, using both. Pruning, again, is simply cutting back branches. There are several different types of cuts. We'll get to them in a minute, but pruning implies cutting on a tree. Training, on the other hand, involves manipulation of branches. And I do this and I do this because that's the deal. You have two choices. The way a branch grows is if it's upright, hormonally, it'll trigger vigorous upright growth. It'll grow to the sky. If naturally, with the weight of the wood as the tree matures, the weight of the fruit, the branch goes from upright down towards horizontal. There's a whole nother set of hormones that are triggered within that branch that say, I know that's anthropomorphic, but attributing human-like qualities to non-human things. But it says, the message sent is, don't grow so much fruit. Upright growth is vigorous, so when a tree is young, a branch is young, or if a branch is needing a little giddy up and go, you train it up, straight up. It'll grow out. If it's too vigorous, just train it down a tick. When we get to the video, we'll have some demos of devices and techniques you can use. So that's kind of what the tree wants to do. It grows up and then it splays out. It grows up vigorously and then it slows growth and starts to fruit. You want to aid that process, get the tree up there and fill space quick, and then slow it down. So your options up, down, influence, vigor, fruitfulness. The other way that you can manipulate branches is horizontally. And this is simply, again, about that spatial arrangement you're trying to create to allow light into the center of the core of your tree. If two branches are too close together, you train them apart. And you allow light down into the core of the tree. And I don't know, well, actually I do know. I'm wild about training. It's so much fun. You'll see, we have all these little tools. And usually people are jazzed by it too, but it's used in tandem with pruning. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay. There are a few preliminaries you need to know. The first one is, as it says here, know your buds. And then you need to know your cuts and the expected responses. There are two types of buds on fruit trees. There are vegetative buds and fruit buds. Fruit buds contain flowers which will express, hopefully get pollinated, and set fruit. Vegetative buds have give you either a leaf, which is good, or a branch with leaves. So let's go back to the fruit buds here for a minute, previous slide. Back up, oh, there we are. This is a pretty good, I wrote this book, Fruit Trees for Every Garden, 10-speed press. And I only learned a couple things in the publishing industry. One is something like this is called an illo, shorthand for illustration. These are illustrations my wife Stephanie Martin did in the book, but this is a pretty good depiction of a bunch of different expressions of fruit buds. And it turns out, oh look, I've got a branch here. I don't know how well you can see this, but I hope you can. So it's important for you to be able to recognize the different bud types. And let's describe what a fruit bud looks like. It's fat. I'll do my little fruit bud litany. Fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud. A lot of fruit buds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 in a 6, 7-inch run. Now you can't have 6, 7 fruits there. You could probably thin it down to 1 or 2, but you've got a lot of fruiting potential on this branch here. Fruit buds are fat, they're round, and they protrude up or stick up from the main branch. It's the way it is. Fruit buds occur only on 2-year-old or older wood. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the other type of buds. Vegetative buds. Vegetative buds can either put out a leaf or put out a branch that grows and has leaves. The only buds you're going to have on 1-year-old wood are vegetative buds. On 2-year-old and older wood, you'll have, as shown here, primarily fruit buds, but also there are a few vegetative buds. But 1-year-old wood has all vegetative buds. 2-year-old and older wood has predominantly fruit buds, but also some vegetative buds. Just so happens I have enough. And again, I don't know if you can see it. We have the drawing, and then we have the real thing here. This is a 1-year-old branch. This is a vegetative bud, vegetative bud, vegetative bud, vegetative bud, on down the line. I'm going to describe them visually. They are pointed, slender, and tightly clasped to the branch. And that's the deal. Okay, if you want a branch to grow.
Hey, Orin, can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
There was a question if the types of buds manifest in the same way on non-palm trees, like, for example, fig.
Sophisticated question. Let's confine our remarks largely to the 2 broad groups of temperate zone deciduous fruits called palm fruits, which means small-seeded, and it's principally apples, pears, and quinces, and stone fruits, anything with a pit in the center. Plums, pluots, prunes, apricots, apriums, peaches, nectarines, cherries, almonds, and the like. The manifestation of buds on the stone fruits is slightly different in terms of their specific look, but it's about the same. You will find only vegetative buds on 1-year-old wood, and they'll look about as I described and as the palm fruit, apple, pear buds look, and similarly with fruit buds. Fruit buds are bumps on the stem. Fruit buds are on older wood, not the current new wood. Figs are a bit beyond category. They do things differently. They actually, if you go in to look at your dormant fig now, it actually has next year's crop already on it. Little mini fig. It was formed sometime in the fall. And the vegetative buds will look much like I described the apple buds here or pear buds here, but they're totally dormant right now. So, okay, so there are 2 bud types. And buds are just dynamic growth centers. You need to why do you need to know what the bud types look like? All right, little anecdote. The name of the individual involved, who's a friend, will not be disclosed tonight. I got a couple. Has these beautiful big Santa Rosa plums. Hardly ever prunes it. A few years ago on a Sunday, January, called me up, said, "Hey, Orin, I'm pruning my plums." I said, "Very good. I'm proud of you." He said, "Well, I cut off all that little bumpy wood. What do I do now?" And I said, "Well, you wait 2 years till your fruit wood grows back." So especially on stone fruits, there's little weak twigs, little short shoots like that. The fruit buds don't look that impressive, but it's really helpful to know what they are so you don't cut them off. And then probably even more importantly, if you want a branch to grow, you need to cut it back, head it back, prune it back, those are all synonyms, to a vegetative bud. It takes a vegetative bud to grow a branch, to regrow a branch or to extend a branch. So vegetative buds, fruit buds, what do they look like? And it's kind of, there's so much stuff like this in farming and gardening. I call it pattern recognition. You need to figure out what it is you're looking at or what it is you're looking for. Let's talk a little bit. So bud types, critically important. If you look at your tree, say you have an established tree and it doesn't have a lot of fruit buds on it, real strong message it's sending, not enough sunlight. So you would need to open that tree up by doing some thinning cuts, get more light into the core of the tree. We'll talk about thinning cuts in a minute here. But let's go into the cuts. There are two basic cuts. And right now I'm talking about winter pruning because, well, it's winter. There's summer pruning too, and it has a different set of rules. Come on back in July or August, we'll have a summer pruning workshop. But for now, winter pruning. Two basic cuts, heading cuts and thinning cuts. A heading cut is where you cut up, out of a branch. You cut a portion of the branch off. You cut it back, a portion of its previous year's growth. And a couple things about heading cuts that seem counterintuitive, but the more you cut, the stronger it grows. So if I have a branch like this and I leave it alone, it'll grow millimeters. That's okay. It won't thicken. It might end up bearing fruit and becoming a serious sagger. But sometimes as a tree and a branch matures, you just leave it alone. If I cut it back a little, say like 25% of its previous season's growth, it'll grow maybe a foot. If I cut it back in the vicinity of 50% or more, it'll grow, this is a pretty stimulating cut, it'll grow 2 or 3 feet. If I cut it back to all but one bud, duck and cover. That thing is gonna grow like crazy. So there's a gradient. The more you cut into 1-year-old wood, the stronger and longer the growth response in the following season. In a sense, you could say you only have to ask and answer one question with a branch and collectively with a tree or a set of trees, and that is, do I want this branch to grow? And if the answer is yes, then you prune it, and you prune it with a heading cut. The more you want it to grow, the more you cut it back into 1-year-old wood. If I don't want it to grow, walk away, leave it alone, like that. But I've been remiss in several respects, no doubt. Let's talk about making the cut. And I think there might be a slide up ahead. No, keep going. Here we are. We have a rendering of one of the most, first of all, tools owe to trade. You need to get yourself a really high quality pair of bypass, not anvil, bypass pruners. Formerly, the picture on the screen was the tool of choice, the Felco, Swiss company. They have a number of different numbered models. The standard one that I like the best is number 2, but they have number 8 is good for smaller hands. They have ones with, if you're doing a lot of pruning, rotating piece that's easier on your wrist like that. But Felco is an excellent tool. It was the tool of choice forever. But about 8 or 10 years ago, along came the ARS. This is a Japanese concern. And we don't know what it's a big corporation. And we don't know what the ARS stands for. But we've named it Always Really Sharp, because I've had these for a year and a half and I haven't sharpened them. And I might add, I haven't needed to sharpen them. They have a hard tempered blade that is amazing. They also have what I like is a quick release. You just hit the handle and it opens up. Then when you want to close it, you have to flick it like that. It is one of the better balanced tools I've ever seen. It just feels, well, as they say, right as rain. So get yourself a good pair of bypass pruners. With it, as is the case in so many professions with tools, you kind of get what you pay for. And you need to get a good quality tool and you need to keep it sharp because you need to make clean cuts. A clean cut from a sharp tool will callus and heal quicker. But how do you cut? You cut back a branch to the bud you want to grow. And let me just say that buds are pointers or directional arrows. And that is to say that the direction the bud that you cut to, the topmost bud that remains, the direction that that points is the direction of resumption of growth. So I have some options here. I cut to a top facing bud and it grows up or even into the center of the tree. Don't want to really do that. I cut to a lateral bud, it grows out. The norm is to cut to an outward facing or an under facing bud. But if I have two branches that are too close together, if you cut to two outward facing buds, it's a form of training, it'll grow out. So bud direction, buds are pointers, buds are arrows. Cut to a bud pointing in the direction you want regrowth. And then when I'm gonna prune to here. Here's the bud. When you make a cut, make it at about a 45-degree angle, sloping away from the bud. And this is so that when water, say rain, remember rain, or irrigation overhead falls, the water sheds off and not into the bud. This is important in wet areas, like we used to be in the winter, or areas where it rains a lot in the summer. And you can see here, I've left a little bit of a stub, bud, top of the cut. And 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, don't fuss, but leave a stub. And the reason is over the course of the summer, particularly in hot areas, but also in areas like ours that are semi-arid, you get a little desiccation in the wood here, a little bit of dieback. If you cut tight to the bud, it might desiccate the bud and kill it. Leave a little stub. So you make a cut at a 45-degree angle, facing away from the bud, so water sheds. You leave a bit of a stub. You use a clean tool, and you're definitive in your cuts. You just do it. Whoops. Go onto the keyboard. So that's how you cut.
Hey, Orin, could you go over how to identify 1-year-old growth or 1-year-old versus?
Good. So it happens, let me go to the broom closet. I have some branches in it. I brought the orchard home with me. I think I can.
And actually, maybe Delise, you could stop sharing your screen so Orin can be.
Should I be full screen so I can see myself? I'm not really wild about seeing myself, but I want to see the branch. Greetings.
And I'll just jump in and say, if the way your Zoom is set up, you can't, Orin still is Lilliputian. You can click on the 3 dots in the top right corner of his video and say pin video, and he'll do the other Jonathan, the other thing. Get bigger.
This goes to my opening statement. Okay, we're going to throw a little light on pruning. How the heck are we going to do that remotely? Well, at the Allen Chadwick Garden, we've always had this informal motto, an utter disregard for the impossible. How can you start a garden and a farm at a major research university that teaches practical skills? You can't do that. We did that. How can you start a garden and get a really beautiful, fertile soil eventually with a rocky clay subsoil? You can't do that. We did that. How can you teach pruning on Zoom? Oh, we're doing it. Okay, let's look at this branch. This is a 2-year-old branch. I'll just zoom it left to my left to right here. It starts at the base. It was cut off a major branch, and it grows and it grows, and it extends up here. If we look along, this is a 2-year-old branch. Let's look along here. And then y'all run out into the garden tomorrow, the orchard, and do this with a real tree. Oh, look, this tree didn't get the memo. It's winter. Be dormant. No worries. Apples often don't ever go fully dormant in this climate. But let's look at the tip here. We look here, perhaps you can see just a little stub. That is the pruning wound from last January's pruning. This branch was headed, and I'm going to say from the look at the extension growth, it was probably headed pretty hard, maybe 50% of its length. And so, boom, the top bud grew. It grew a nice 2.5 feet. This is 1-year-old wood. I can tell I'm going into 2-year-old wood by several indicators, one of which is, as I mentioned, this little pruning stub here. If I didn't prune these branches, or you didn't prune your branches, what you would see at this point, the demarcation line between 1-year-old and 2-year-old wood, is a whole bunch of little circular rings tight together, indicates stop, start. So ringing on an unpruned branch or a pruning wound on a pruned branch indicates older wood, this last season's wood. Also, let's just look at the wood. It's thinner in caliper on 1-year-old wood. It's more bronzy, lively, it's younger. It only has vegetative buds, bump, 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 like that. They are, again, tightly clasped to the stem. They are pointed, they are slender. They will grow you a leaf or a branch variously. As we move below the pruning cut, we move into 2-year-old wood here. And the girth of the wood is thicker as we go down the line. And lo and behold, I've got a fruit bud. I've got a fruit bud. I've got a lateral here. Remember me saying laterals are our friends? That has a fruit bud, a fruit bud, a fruit bud, a fruit bud, and a fruit bud. I got fruit buds on the main stem. I got a fruit bud here, fruit bud there, fruit bud everywhere. I'm happy. This was a highly productive branch on a tree. It gave up the ghost in honor of education. But this is a nice branch. Its length, how much growth we got in year 1, how much growth we got in year 2. It's behaving according to the books. Vegetative buds only on the 1-year-old wood, and a whole lot of fruit buds either on the main stem or on short laterals on the older wood here. So those are some of the ways that you can tell how old the wood is. Where's the new wood? And let me just, since I'm here, let's just throw a whole lot of things into this branch here. One is I want to prune this branch in a minute. I want to demonstrate a heading cut. And then I'll demonstrate a shortening cut. And then I'll find something to thin. I'm going to make a heading cut on this branch. I'm going to do that because this little thing says demonstrate heading. So I'll do that. I'm going to cut this branch back a portion of its growth. I have to ask and answer the question, do I want it to grow? Let's say I've got a 5 or 6-year-old tree that's 5 or 6 or 8 feet tall, but I'd like another 3 feet of growth. Then the answer would be, yeah, I want to prune it. I want to head it. I want to head it relatively heavily in the vicinity of 50% of the growth from last year. Growth from last year, from here to here. And I want it to continue to head out in that direction. So I'll head it to an under-facing or outward-facing bud, about 50% of its length, and it might look like that. So I just headed this. I am trustful that I will replicate the couple feet of growth I got this year, and we'll be going on, and life will be good, or at least better. Let's look at some of the other, so what is the main effect of heading a branch? It extends or grows the branch. You cut it back, the more you cut it back, the longer and stronger it will grow the following season. But there are a couple other dividends from heading a branch. One is it thickens and strengthens the branch. Trees are different than annual plants. Most annual plants make what are called apical meristems, tip meristems. They make cells and they grow longer. They get a little thicker, but not much. Trees are different. They make lateral meristems. They get fatter. They get wider. This is why when you look, you cut down a tree and you look, you see tree rings. That's the result of its widening. So you head a branch, you get extension, regrowth. You get a thick branch, and as you can see here, I hope, this is the pruning wound here, and this is 2-year-old wood. So what happened when I headed here the previous year? This is my cut from last year, but the year before I headed here. I headed, it grew on, and it formed a number of laterals and fruit buds right on the main branch. So you from heading, you get extension. From heading, you get thickening, strengthening, mechanical strength. That's important, self-supporting branches. And you get fruit bud development, often on short, weak laterals like this, and or right on the stem. Your strong wood is structural. Your weak and flat wood is fruitful. So that's kind of heading cuts. The other type of cut is called a thinning cut. Hang on, I'll be right back. I'm off to the closet again. Oh, look, I have a veritable tree here. See, I can do this without wrecking the chandelier. This is a nice branch, it was. And let me just initially start off by making a thinning cut. This branch was growing at about this angle before I took it off. And this is, you can see this little stick here. This is where the pruning cut was made last year, this little stump. So it grew two. Didn't read the books, go to school, didn't know how to behave, didn't follow the rules. Imagine that. It grew two primary extensions here. And I don't want that. I only want one, so I'm going to thin one. Thinning involves cutting out a branch in its entirety. I've got this chandelier here, I'm sorry. In its entirety. So I'm going to thin this branch. I cut it out as point of origin. And let's look at the point at which I cut it. I didn't actually cut flush to the stem. You'll see this little bulbous swelling here. It's called the collar. And you want to cut to the collar, not actually flat to the branch. And that is because all these different branches are different compartments in a tree. And if you cut flat and leave an opening, you can have disease or pests enter. By leaving the collar, there are a whole lot of undifferentiated cells in this little bulbous swelling here, the collar, that will very quickly callus the wound and heal it. So heading cuts. Let's make a heading cut. I want this branch to grow. I want it to grow up and out. I'm pruning it to an underfacing bud. Boom, done. Thinning cuts. Let's just thin another branch because it's so much fun. It's a little weak branch here. I thin it out like that. There's heading cuts and thinning cuts. You use heading cuts initially when the tree is young to stimulate growth and form it. Once a tree is fully formed, the height and width you want, you back off from doing heading cuts. You might do a few, but you don't do tons, and you don't do them of any magnitude. And you more move into the realm of two other types of cuts. One is the aforementioned thinning cuts. And what you need to do is look down into the core of the tree in the summer when the tree is leafed out and see, and ask and answer the question, do I have enough light? And you need at least 50 to 80% of the total 100% of the light that's falling from the sky to strike branches in the interior of the tree to manufacture and maintain quality fruit. So you could get a light meter, cheap light meter, and measure it, but you need about 50% or more sunlight to have fruit buds. You will come to recognize that percentage of light, and I call it not dappled shade, but dappled sunlight. There's a little bit of flecking on the leaves, but it's mostly sunny. And if you're looking at the interior of the trees, you could say in a sense, well, the trees will speak to you. That is to say, if there's fruit, if there's fruit buds, if there's big fruit, if it's well colored and tasty and nutritious, you got enough light. To the degree that that's not true, you don't. It's really a good thing to look at and do in the summer to evaluate the core of your trees for adequate sunlight. And if you decide there's not enough sunlight, right then, look to the top of the tree and thin a branch or two and watch, do it on a sunny day in the middle of the day, and you'll see the sunlight just tumble into the core of the tree, and you'll walk away knowing, yeah, I got enough light like that. If if you're giving a demonstration, you'll get a lot of oohs and ahs. Oh, wow, that's really cool. And it is. You look at the trees now, and there's plenty of light in the core. There's no leaves, but it's critical to have enough light in the core of the tree. So as the tree matures, you look to thin to allow light down into the center of the tree. There's actually a couple more. Okay, so there are heading cuts and thinning cuts, two broad categories. Heading cuts, the standard heading cut as mentioned is you cut a branch back a portion of the previous year's growth. The more you cut, the stronger and longer the regrowth. There's another type of heading cut that's called a shortening cut. Be right back. This is a branch that I performed a shortening cut on last winter. Let me get my tree bondo here and say, it probably looked like this. It had a nice extension at the tip of 1-year-old growth. And I looked down the branch to where that point of differentiation between 1 and 2-year-old wood. I saw the pruning wound or the rings that I referred to. And I went slightly into that older 2 wood and I saw expressed fruit buds and I cut above that. This is called a shortening cut. You shorten a branch. And when you shorten a branch by cutting slightly into 2-year-old wood in the winter, you had better be sure that that's what you want, because that branch will never really grow again. What it'll do is what this branch has done, it'll start to make lateral fruit buds. So you best be done with growing that branch before you shorten it slightly into older wood. Okay, one more cut. I'll be back. It's a big branch. Okay. I had a hard time cutting this off, but I did it. This is an example of a renewal cut. A renewal cut is where you cut a branch back almost all the way. It's almost a thinning cut, but not quite. This branch was attached to the tree here, and you can see the pruning wound here. At least I hope you can. Where I renewed this branch a year ago in January. I renewed all the branches on this tree. It wasn't unhealthy, biologically, compromised. It just wasn't growing after about 5 or 6 years. And so I renewed it. I cut it back to all the major branches back to a stub like this. And this is what resulted. It regrew. So if you, for whatever reason, you need to renew a branch, and this usually happens in the top of the tree. You have a branch, you're going along 5, 6, 8 years. It's beautiful, it's fruitful. It starts to shade the interior of the tree, but you kind of like having a branch here. You kind of like to have a branch there again. So you regrow it by renewing it. You cut a branch back to a stub, and you get, as you can see here, a pretty vigorous response. Having done that, I would choose to, again, these 2 branches are too close together. Say it's growing like this. Well, I could spread them and thin them. I could cut them to 2 opposing buds to make them go in that direction. Or, for the sake of demonstration, I could thin them. I'm going to thin this. Knowing when to move from a smaller tool to a bigger tool, i.e. loppers, is when you see that grimace like that. Should have used loppers, they're a little too clunky in the house. So a renewal cut to regrow a branch for whatever reason. And in truth, with fruits over time, you do, actually I like standing up, you do a lot of renewal, particularly in the top of the tree. So questions on the types of cuts. Heading cuts, cutting back a branch, a portion of 1-year-old wood. The more you cut into 1-year-old, the stronger, longer the regrowth. Thinning cuts, cut a branch out of its point of origin. You need a bud to grow a branch. You don't have one, you won't get any regrowth. Used principally to thin out a tree. It's either too clustered and tight, busy, or too tall. A shortening cut where you like the branch, it's filled with space, it's good, that's enough. Let's cut slightly into 2-year-old wood to a fruit bud, and it stops and also enhances fruit bud development down the branch. and a renewal cut. I had a branch, it was a good, better part of a decade. It's now starting to sag. It's now starting to shade the core of the tree. I kind of like the idea of having a branch there. Let's do it again. Let's cut it back to a stub and regrow it over the course of 2, 3, 4 years like that. Those are the major cuts. Maybe we can go back to the slideshow.
Well, so
If there are questions, I can take them at any time.
There were a few that came in, but I think you somewhat addressed them. But yeah, on a renewal cut, are you looking for a bud to cut to, or yeah?
No, it's no, you're not. That's a very good question. It's kind of generic. You just leave a stub. It could be 2 inches, it could be a foot. And often what you're going to find is there are no expressed buds in that lower portion of the branch. So you don't see any buds that cut. The truth of the matter is there are latent buds there. And once you cut that, make that big cut, it'll mobilize those latent buds as a stress response, and they'll grow, as you saw with that. It grew 2 long branches, but you usually don't see a bud there. And it's not like slipshod or anything. It's just non-specific. You cut back, yeah, like that. Okay, other questions, Claire?
I feel like I'm at a control desk here, but I think, how is a renewal cut different than a thinning cut?
Because you don't leave, with a thinning cut, you don't leave a stub. You cut tight to the stem, again, noting the little collar. With and there should, well, let me say, sometimes these trees have not read the books, gone to school, and thus don't know how to behave. But generally, you will get no response from a thinning cut. You just cleaned it out. Whereas with a renewal cut, you leave a little stub, and internally undifferentiated cells will make buds and grow. Trees just want to grow. It's a wound response. So that's the main difference. And in fact, a good point to build on with this is a lot of times people think they're making thinning cuts, and they're really making, this branch is too much, I need to thin it out, and they leave a stub and they just regrow it. So make sure your thinning cuts are tight to the collar, and your renewal cuts, yeah, just leave 8 inches, a foot, something like that. Other questions, Claire?
Can you, and you may be getting to this, so this might be a good transition question. Can you explain how or why you do a thinning cut to space out your major branches?
How or why you do a thinning cut to,
I think it's where you're headed, and if go for it. Never mind.
Really? Let's put that in a parking lot here.
Okay, that's great.
Let's get back to the script, as it were. Okay, there are 2 basic tree forms. Let's go back to that slide, Delise, with the cones. Oop, there it was. Okay, this modified central leader and the open center. Let's look at the open center first. It's basically a cone, a big, wide, circular opening with a narrow, tapering base. And you can have 3, 5, 7, even 9 primary arms. They're called multiple leaders. This one has what looks like 3, but you can see they double or Y a couple times. It's just about filling space evenly, but not too much space. So there's these shafts of light, alleys of light. And you want, with your open center form, 3, 5, 7 primary branches. They grow up and out at about a 60, 70 degree angle. There's good spacing between them. And you would like them to be equal in vigor. So you have a balanced tree. They can branch a couple times. It's just about filling, but not overfilling space. Flip that cone, as you see on the left, wide at the bottom, narrow at the base, or let's go to the triangular modified slide. Let's go to the water bottle. The previous ILO was done by my wife, Stephanie Martin. This was done by a wonderful, a wonderful apprentice named Molly Brown in 1995, who I asked her if she could draw me some tree forms, and look what she did. And she parlayed that into getting to the UCSC Science Illustration program, and she parlayed that into a career as a science illustrator. But this is good. You could say that the inverted cone is a modified central leader, or you could say it's a triangle. Again, narrow at the top, wide at the base. An isosceles triangle, as you see here. The two sides, longer sides are equal, the bottom shorter. So this is a good form tree, but the open center is equally as good. They both work well if executed well. These are actually three different training systems. The one on the left is the modified central leader, and the one in the middle, the next one to your right, is what's called a vertical or French axe. It's just a skinny leader tree. And the two on the right, one is called a slender spindle, the smaller one. And this is a pretty old technique from Europe, 200, 300, 400 years ago. And you can see how the leader bends a little bit. It's a way of suppressing height. So the tree grows up, you have a nice branch structure down below. You don't want it to get much taller, you bend it, and then it grows up again, and then you bend it. It's just got a nice elegance to it, kind of an S-curve. And then on the one on the right is called a high-tech or hybrid tree cone. And to tell you the truth, it ticks me off because Washington State University had the arrogance and hubris to basically grow a bigger, slender spindle and copyright it. So you can't grow that form theoretically unless you pay them a royalty. Focus. Okay, so those are your choices. This is kind of greatest hits of students I've had. This is one of a series of drawing a fellow named Noah Esky did about 7 or 8 years ago. He was an intern, and he was taking an internship for 5 credits, but he didn't realize that. He thought he was doing it for 2 credits. So he needed a whole bunch of more hours at the end of the quarter. So I sat him down in front of a whole bunch of trees and I said, hey kid, draw this. And boy, did he ever do it. This is a really sweet rendering of a modified central leader tree with all the bells and whistles. We'll get to the bells and whistles in a minute. But the component of form is you have a central leader. That's the trunk, vertical growth. And then you will have a series of branches or a few tiers of branches. And you can see here below the spreader sticks, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 primary scaffolds that comprise the first tier of a modified central leader. You can see that they're well spread vertically and also horizontally. So you allow light into the core of the tree. Now that didn't happen naturally. They were trained, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then you have something on the leader above the top spreader, which is nothing, but it's something. It's a skip on the leader, 1 foot, 2, even 3 feet, where you don't have any branches. And this is like the I-5 highway of sunlight coming into the core of the tree. A skip between the first tier and the second tier affords you tons of light down to the core of the tree. The lower portion of the tree is more easily accessed, and you want to accentuate the upper tree, part of the tree. It's just icing on the cake. It's good. But you can see that skip, that's critical. And the second tier of branches is formed here, 1, 2, and 3. And there you go. You've got yourself a beautiful modified central leader. I'll get to the modified part in a second. But there's another rule, principles, as it were, with modified central leader tree. So you have a lower tier of branches, could have 3, 5, 7 branches that are well distributed around the tree, up and down the trunk. You have a skip of a couple feet between tiers. You have a second tier. Okay, here's the additional rules. The second tier branches should be less in number. So if you've got 5 or 7 down below, you got 3 or 5 up above. And they should be shorter than the lower branches. So you keep that pyramidal shape in order. The pyramidal shape that is achieved by having shorter branches in the top of the tree. It is also achieved by having a good skip of a couple, 3 feet on the leader, is make or break on this system. So there's a tiny little modified central leader tree. I love modified central leader trees. They are exquisite. They are actually more productive. You have more fruit-bearing surface per size for similar size tree as compared to an open center. They are quite a bit more sophisticated and detailed and difficult to form properly. But if you're up for a challenge, they too could be your tree of choice. But I recommend generally going with the open center. It's elegantly simple and good enough, as it were. Let's look at, whoops, let's not look at that guy. Let's get back here. Okay, so let's look at this, the bells and whistles. On this tree, we have a bunch of different training devices. You can see the spreaders. You have a couple choices, and you'll see them in the video in a minute. But a very easy way to make tree spreaders is just to get redwood lath and cut a V-notch in the end, and then you just put them between the branches that you want to train, and you bend them. Be careful. You will probably now and then break a branch because you bent it too far, but you'll develop this kind of fingertip sensitivity. I want the branch to be this far, but I can only get this. So wooden spreaders work well. There are also metal and plastic ones, and they have a pointy end, and you can just jab it into the tree branch, and it does not hurt the tree. And the advantage of these is that they are really light and easy to work with. And in windy areas, they don't blow out of the tree like these notched lath redwood will. Either way, but they're value. I usually cut a whole bunch 6-inch, whole bunch 9-inch, whole bunch foot, whole bunch 15 inches and on like that. So you have a whole bunch of different options like that. The other tools for training, now I can't see the far right of the tree. I just see all your faces, really cool. Claire, is there a weight hanging on this tree?
Yes, the weight pulling branch down.
Okay, so you can use weights. Or you can see these weights, I can't, but, and it's really easy to make your own. You just get 6-packs, the horticultural, not the alcoholic kind, or Dixie cups, and you get Sackcrete, instant concrete, and you pour it in, and then you get a U-shaped fencing staple, and you put it in before the cement sets up, and then you tie a string around it, and then you attach the string to a clothespin, and you pin it on the tree. And these are very good devices for just slightly slowing the upright growth of a branch. Again, upright growth is vigorous, and if I tick it down a bit, it'll slow down and start to fruit up. The other device, appliance as it were, for tree training is what's called a tie down. So you have a stake that you drive into the ground, cant it out like this away from the tree, and drive that stake because it's got to hold the branch. And then you have string that you loop around the stake and the tree branch. Don't tie a tight knot onto the branch, it'll girdle it. And then you have the ability to move a branch both up and down and left and right. So using spreaders, using weights, using tie downs, you can get good spatial arrangement on your branches. You can get that perfect balance of 45 to 60 degrees, which gets you good extension growth and good fruitfulness. If a branch is too rambunctious and growing too much, tie it down more. If it's too weak, tie it up towards vertical. Okay, let's move on. I guess we're gonna play this video. Let me introduce it. This is me talking about a tree. This is a 3 or 4 year old open center tree, a golden russet apple. It's growing along nice, and we're just talking about the components of bringing it along. Some of it will be redundant as per the types of cuts and what they do, the shape of the tree and training devices. Let's go. Okay, folks, let's look at and then treat a nice young 3-year-old open center apple here, the variety golden russet. So let's look at the components of form first. This tree is coming along nicely, and we want to keep it going in the right direction through pruning and training. We'll get to that.
The open center tree is composed of 3 to 5 primary arms that go out and up, maybe out in a 60-70 degree fashion, and comprise a big wide open cone at the top and a narrow base. This wide open top is critical to allow sunlight infall into the core of the tree. So let's look at the primary branches on this tree, or multiple leaders. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is a little needing to be brought along a little. We can handle that with some pruning in a minute. So those are the 4 multiple leaders, primary scaffolds of this tree. Let me point out something else here, which is with this open center form, it's about filling space. And so sometimes you can fork or Y. This would be a good example here. The main branch comes up and forks here. There's enough spread here for sunlight, and then goes up again like that. So I'm happy with the basic form of this tree, but there are some cuts that need to be made to clean it up. Some of them are thinning cuts, some of them are shortening cuts, some of them are heading cuts. Why don't we handle the thinning cuts first, because that'll clarify form. Let me demonstrate a thinning cut. I'm going to cut this branch out at its point of origin. Note, I'm actually not going to cut it flush to the main branch here. If you look in here, you'll see a little bit of ringing at the base of this branch. That's called the collar, and you leave the collar. So I'm going to make the cut. The reason you leave the collar is because it helps the wound callus quickly and heal. The other type of cut the other main type of cut you would make would be a heading cut. A heading cut is cutting back a branch a portion of its growth. If you look at, again, at our primaries here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this instance, they're growing nicely, but I want a little more growth. So I'm going to head them back. And in heading back, it's absolutely proportional. The more you cut off a branch, the stronger and longer the regrowth is in the following season. So as this is a young tree and I'd like to get another 3 or 4 foot of upright extension out of these branches, I'm going to cut these branches back about half of last year's growth. If you can look here, you see this little stub. This is the pruning wound from where this tree was pruned with a heading cut last winter. And this is how much it grew this year. So I'm going to cut this back about half its length, and I would hope that I get a similar 2 or 3 foot growth response. I want to cut it to a bud that's headed in an outward direction, that way. Buds are directional arrows. So the bud that you cut to, the direction it points, will be the direction of regrowth. So I'm up and out like that. Let me move around and do a similar thing to all these branches. Again, up and out, up and out. So I'm trustful that I will get a good growth response from these heading cuts. If this tree had been at the height I want, I would have just barely tipped it, just stimulated a little bit. Let me note that in addition to growth, extension of the branch that is a result from a head cut, there are 2 other dividends. One is heading thickens branches and gives them structural integrity. They can hold the weight of the fruit in the wood. The other thing is, as you see, as I mentioned, the pruning wound here from last year, yeah, it extended the branch, but it also formed these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beautiful, weak, flat laterals. The big wood or the strong wood in a tree is structural. The weak wood or the flat wood bears the fruit. These weak, flat branches are referred to as laterals, and hey folks, laterals are our friends. There's a second type of heading cut, again, when you cut a branch back a portion of its growth, and that's called a shortening cut. And this is used when a branch has got as long as you want it, you stop it, you shorten it. And you do that by cutting slightly into older wood to an expressed fruit bud. this is a fruit. Let me show you a few fruit buds here. This is my fruit bud litany. Fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud. They are fat, round, and protrude out from the stem, and they bear fruit. So this is my main branch here. This is nice, but I can't have two primaries here. They're too close, so I'm going to shorten this branch by cutting it back just slightly into 2-year-old wood. And what I've created here is what I call a fruit hanger. A nice, stout, flat lateral that already, again, the litany goes, has a fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud, fruit bud, and a fruit bud. Now, I can't carry 5 fruits there, but I sure could carry 3 nice, big, juicy ones. So I always use the terms pruning and training in tandem. Pruning is when you cut on a tree. Again, 2 basic cuts. A heading cut, you cut a branch back a portion of its growth. Thinning cut, you cut it out at its point of origin. But you also want to use training to give yourself a good tree form. Training has 2 components. You can move a branch from upright towards flat, and this is just simply hormonal. Internally, hormonally, an upright branch is vigorous and will grow. So that may suit your purpose or not. And if you want to slow down the upward growth of a branch, just simply train it out a little bit flat. The other thing is you can move branches horizontally. I'm going to use one of these spreaders here to do just that. These branches are good, but again, the concept of the open center form is alleys of light down into the core. I've got a nice alley here, sunfall, a little too tight here. So I want to spread these branches. You have old school redwood lath with a V-notch cut in it, one option. And online you can buy these metal or plastic spreaders. Both work well. I'm old school. So I'm just simply gonna position these branches a little further apart. Let me note that the metal spreaders have a little spike in the end that you jab into the trunk. 1, it doesn't hurt the tree at all. 2, in windy areas, they stay in place better than the lath ones, but this is good. So you see I've spread these, allowed sunlight to penetrate down into the core of the tree. There's always plenty of sunlight in the outer periphery of the tree. You'll have good fruit, quality fruit, big fruit, juicy fruit, as it were. But you need to get light down into the interior to keep that fruit wood happening, lively, to produce quality fruit. So training sometimes, as well as pruning, suits your purposes in that regard. Okay, so let's recount where we're at with this nice little tree. It's an open center form again. 1, 2, 3, 4 primary scaffolds or multiple leaders. They go up and out into the light, creating a nice circular opening at the top so that the sun can infiltrate to the core of the tree. Someone once said, oh, it's a sun cup. And then I joked, fill your cup with light, fill your life with fruit. So be it. Okay, so I've got that as my basic structure. I headed the tips of all the primaries, about half the previous year's growth to stimulate them to grow 2 or 3 more feet and to form some laterals behind the heading cuts. I did a few thinning cuts just to clean up the tree and again allow light entry into the core. I used a series of spreaders to separate the branches horizontally again to create shafts of light, and to get this one to be more upright. An old line from a Mississippi John Hurt song, I'm satisfied, I'm tickled too. There you go.
All right. I'm going to wrap it up here with a little bit on mature trees, but just a little bit. We're hoping to make a whole bunch of videos on basically hoping to take what the UCSC Farming Garden does online. Now we need to, but also to use in conjunction with in-person events going forward. And when we get the quality good and we have a succession of them, we'll post them on the Caspis YouTube channel. So I'm hoping to have a just planted tree, a tree like we just saw, a tree a little bigger, and a big old tree. And me and Jim Clark are just a marvelous videographer who we've worked with before, who is a technical whiz in terms of his profession, but he creates some of his finished videos that he's done for us are just lush and rich. So when we get them, we'll send them out to you or post them. Let's talk a little bit about big old trees. Usually people, in fact, this last week, I got a lot of pictures of big old trees from people. Someone commented, you know, that's good, but my trees don't look like the trees you're talking about. So this tree here, this might be something you encounter. I'm going to guesstimate this is a 20, 30-year-old tree. Looks like somebody who knew what they were doing did that and did it annually, was steady with it at the outset. So you have a nice open center form. And then maybe they sold the property. Maybe they retired and they turned it over to the next generation. Maybe, who knows? But I would say, in looking at this tree, ain't nobody done nothing to it for about 10 or 15 years. And boy, is there a lot of whippy upright growth. And when this tree is leafed out in the summer, it will shade itself to the point where in a few years it will have no fruit. In fact, if you look at the bottom, the thicker branches there, already they have no buds on them. The wood, what you're growing down there is firewood. What you want to grow is fruit, a little structural wood to hang fruit. So we're going to look at another slide in a minute, but basic, let's go back to that tree. Basically, in a situation like this, well, this speaks to don't let a tree get away from you. But if you do, in bringing it back, a tree doesn't get away from you in 1 year, and you're not going to bring it back in 1 year. In fact, if you make too many cuts on a tree at one time, the tree will go bonkers. It'll be even worse than it is now. So it's a process. And all I would do on this tree is get myself about a 12, 15 foot ladder and get up there and start to thin out the upright growth. Now I can see that it has a lot of fruit wood on it, and that's good. But there are going to be issues very shortly with it shading itself too much. So I would start to thin out, that is cut out in their entirety, a goodly number of these branches, and I'll qualify that in a minute, but make sure that they're thinning cuts and not renewal cuts. You cut them out at the point of origin like that. And I would, the way you go at a tree like this, there's too much tree, is you do it in stages. You only make thinning cuts, and you look to make cuts where you can take the most wood out with the least number of cuts. Rather than go snip, 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 you go snip like that. So start thinning. Favor the branches that are weaker and splaying out. Get rid of the core branches. They are shading the base of the tree. But you cannot, you see the volume of this tree, and I don't want to sound too woo here, folks, but you need to spend some time with your tree, vision it, visualize the tree you want within reason, and then move forward. And you do this incrementally. You only make thinning cuts. So whatever the volume of wood I want to take out of this tree, I take no more than 25% of that total amount of wood out in any one pruning session. And I double up. I thin in the winter and I thin in the summer, July or August. Year one, 25% goes away in the winter, 25% in the summer. Year two, ditto. And then you're at the place where you're going to be, and you'll have a greatly improved tree. And then you need to make sure it doesn't get away from you again. So it's a process. Let's look at the other slide that someone sent me. This tree, yeah. This person sent me a tree with a little blurb, and my response was, my condolences. Lose the mow and blow peeps. Find someone who knows about trees. Learn it yourself. So this tree has been essentially pollarded. You know, in Golden Gate Stand, they have those sycamores, so they cut back to a stub every year. Well, you don't want to do that with apples and pears and such. That's what was done. You see the knobs up, about 8-10 feet here, and then you see all the whippy upright growth. So it looks like every year someone's come and just cut it back. And what is the response? You get a mondo response, a number of branches growing vigorously upright, and you're headed down the road to ruin here. So similarly, what I would do is, and this tree is much, much better shaped than the previous one like that. But unless a tree is compromised by health, I don't think there's a tree that you can't bring back. Again, engaging in using only thinning cuts, no more than 25% per session, and doing it over a period of a couple of years. So that's what I would do. Again, I favor the branches that are weaker and go out, can't out, and I disfavor, eliminate the strong, vigorous ones in the core. And you only are doing thinning cuts. You're not doing any detailed pruning. You leave that for a few years until you've got the tree back in bounds again. So, okay, let's see what the next slide says. I'm not going to go into summer versus winter cuts here. Let me just say one thing, and then I'll go to my trusty cupboard here, and I have a branch I want to show you, which is that winter pruning with heading cuts invigorates. Summer pruning, even that same heading cut you do in the summer, stops growth. Hang on. Now, this tree, you know what season it is, but this is a branch that I headed in the summer. If I had headed it in the winter, it would have grown a foot or two. By heading in the summer, you stop growth, you see the pruning wound here, and you very rapidly induce fruit bud development. How rapidly? I did this in July or August. By September, it not only formed a fruit bud, but it flowered, got pollinated, and set fruit. Now, you don't really want these little mini apples in January. But the point is, I have started this branch down the road to being fruitful by employing a summer cut. It's a marvelous tool. You cut in the winter, it grows. You head in the summer, it stops. They don't know exactly why this is true, but the main speculation is that when you cut in the summer, the pruning wound issues a gas called ethylene. It's a type of a gaseous hormone, and it seeps back into the branch. And for some reason, they haven't figured out what the causative mechanism is yet. It very rapidly produces fruit buds. So you get a localized effect, and if you make a whole lot of cuts on a tree, you get a generalized effect. So summer pruning can be a good tool in that regard. I think we should stop, and if people want to stick around, I can try to service some questions. But before we do that, I got a little outro thing I want to read here. Let me see if I can find it buried. Yeah, for those of you who live in Santa Cruz, I go swimming down at Cowles Beach by the wharf almost every day, April to about November when it gets too cold. And right there in the plaza at the base of the wharf is this pretty imposing sculpture done by a man I knew. His name is Alan Cunahan. He's an Irishman. He came over here for a number of years, worked here. In fact, if you look at the gatehouse at the UCSC farm, he did the wainscot stonework on the outer portion of it. It was a side gig. He's a sculptor, and he created a sculpture there, and it's like massive and impressive, and just people walk by and they don't even see it. Go check it out. It's something. There are 4 what he calls seed pods. They're about 3 or 4 foot crescent-shaped things that people think, oh, this must be a bench. And it's so cute. You see little kids lying in it and stuff like that. There are 4 of those. And then there's this huge round, 5 or 6 foot round orb. It's a black rock that he got from a quarry in Ireland. He said it was originally formed in the ocean bottom off Ireland. And he brought it to a studio in Ireland, brought it here, created the sculpture. It's impressive. And then in the middle of it is this rather massive arch that I always thought reminded me a little bit of Stonehenge. And he has embossed into it a whole lot of little crescent moons. And he wrote a poem that I'm going to read for you. And the name of the sculpture is called In the Tides of Time, and that's the name of the poem. On one pillar it's in English, and on one pillar it's in Spanish. And his idea about the sculpture was It represents an opening, a portal of Monterey Bay out into the Pacific and beyond. But the idea is an openness. And the poem goes like this. In the tides of time, we have sought safe harbor here on this western shore, where the waves ebb and flow restlessly, and the seasons in their harvest halls have borne us ripe cargoes of plenty with enough fruit for all. Again, Alan Cunahan, Down by the Water. Okay, probably, I don't know, quitting time, or I could take questions, whatever people like.
Let's see, we can do, I think let's just do like 2 quick questions that a number of people had.
Let's do this here. Coming at you shortly, a seed starting class, probably with either Christoph or Kelly from down at the farm. Growing Asian Vegetables, March 4th. Mark your calendar. Scott Chang Fleeman, he was an apprentice here at the farming garden. He's growing Asian vegetables up in Bolinas, and he is too much, and he knows his stuff, both in the field and in the kitchens. And irrigation basics, Claire, who's giving that class? Do you know?
I believe Avery is.
Avery Miller, who was an apprentice in the second year in the farm garden a few years ago. So all this and more on the way. I'll just put in a plug here. I'd love to give a potato and pepper class. And it could be, you know, in the spring, but it might be better to give it in the mid-late summer when we've got crops to look at and compare and contrast. And I would love, oh, here you go. Everybody grow a whole lot of different varieties of winter squash. Maybe we can actually get together in the fall, in November or December, in the hay barn at the farm, below the farm, and we can have a squash bonanza. I'll give a squash talk. Everybody cooks a dish. We'll have a judging panel, free food for all, mirth and merriment. Do it. Okay.
All right, well, now we're at 6:30, so let's just move it along. Delise, if you could advance the slides. And this work cannot happen without your help. CASPAS relies on grants for over half of its operating income. This workshop was offered last year in person for $60, but we wanted to offer these online workshops for free during the pandemic. It's been a difficult year for all of us, but if you are in a position to support this work, please join the Friends of the UCSC Farm and Garden or make a donation to CASPAS at, and I'll drop it in the link, at this link. All right, and next.
Can I add something here before you go on to a more important slide? And that's, hey folks, well, this is the Alan Chadwick Garden. Look, there's people there. I'm just like warmed by that because it's just me and Claire right now. But when we open up, I'm going to invite anybody who wants to up to a series of free workshops and free community work days, because Lord knows we need the help. All right, Claire, go.
All right. Again, these are workshops we usually offer at a charge, and we are offering them for free. And this is a great opportunity if you would have otherwise spent money on this workshop to redirect those resources to the original stewards of the land where the farm and garden is on. So the core of the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems work is responsible, sustainable land stewardship. Today we honor and learn the original stewards of these lands, the Awaswas-speaking Uyupi tribe. They are represented today by their descendants, the Amamutsun tribal band. We encourage you to understand their history and support their work at the link that potentially Vanessa's dropping as they continue to reclaim their sovereignty and protect the ecosystem for generations to come. And I can grab that link so you all have it. Encourage you to please be generous in supporting the Amamutsun tribal band. So I believe that's it. Again, the recording needs a minute to download, and then it'll get closed captioned and shared with you via email. We'll also share the slides so you can follow along. We appreciate you all coming out and joining us, and we're really excited by the big turnout. And Orin loves to answer questions over email. I'm dropping his email in the chat.
I hate email, but I love your questions. There's been a stream of them, and they're rich, so bring it.
Great. So yeah, please don't be shy about sending him an email with your questions, and hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, folks.